I still remember the echo of that Zoom call, the fake smiles, the rehearsed sympathy, and the moment my entire career was reduced to a PR stunt. They said it was strategic restructuring, but I saw the truth flicker in their eyes. They just wanted to impress the CEO. The boardroom cameras caught every second of my humiliation. A dozen executives watched me being dismissed like an intern who misplaced a file. Except I wasn't an intern. I was the senior treasury director, the one who managed liquidity across the company's 150 million client portfolio. The irony, they needed me to sign off on the very system they used to announce my firing. I kept my face calm, my voice steady, but inside, something cold began to take shape. You don't spend a decade building trust, saving a collapsing balance sheet, negotiating foreign credit lines through 3 recessions, only to be thrown out because the CEO's son wanted to make a bold leadership move. He called it modernization. I called it arrogance. He wore his power like an expensive suit, loud, shiny, and fragile. The CEO's son, Adam Vance, had been in the company for less than 2 years, but his surname carried more weight than my entire track record. He strutted through meetings quoting strategy blogs, treating veteran managers like outdated machinery, and that day when he fired me, he smirked. He wanted the team to see that he could clean house. He wanted applause. He didn't realize that by firing me without due clearance, he'd triggered a silent protocol, written by me, a safeguard buried deep in the company's treasury architecture. It was meant to protect the firm from internal fraud or unauthorized transfers, but in the wrong hands it could do something else entirely. As my laptop screen faded to black, my security access revoked, I whispered to myself, "You just unplugged your safety net, Adam." Within hours, the corporate vault I'd designed, housing over 150 million in client. The escrow funds entered passive freeze mode. It wasn't sabotage. It was compliance. A compliance rule they'd forgotten I created. To unlock it, the company would need a multi-party authorization, including mine. But I was gone. And while they were busy celebrating my dismissal, their clients were about to discover that every cent they thought was liquid was trapped. My revenge wasn't born out of rage. It was precision. Because in finance, power doesn't shout, it waits. And I was done being quiet. Before all this, the company was my second home. Vance Meridian Holdings, a towering name in global investment. Management built its reputation on risk precision, and I was one of the quiet architects behind that image. I joined right after the financial crisis, when most people were still too scared to trust the markets. But I wasn't afraid of numbers. I understood their psychology. I worked late nights under fluorescent lights, balancing impossible ledgers, sealing international liquidity deals when everyone else had given up. It wasn't glamorous work, but it earned respect. The kind of respect you don't ask for. You earn it by keeping the company alive during storms. For years, I was the calm voice in the chaos. The treasury team called me the firewall. Every week, executives would call my department asking, "Is this exposure covered? Or can we release this fund?" And the answer always passed through me. I didn't wield titles, I wielded access. Then came the change. The founder and CEO, Robert Vance, a man of few words and fewer mistakes, decided to step back. His son Adam was handed operational control to modernize leadership. Everyone in the upper floors dressed their anxiety in fake optimism, pretending this transition would be seamless. But beneath it, people whispered what we all knew. Adam had never built anything in his life. His first day, he held a vision session. He wanted younger energy, tech efficiency, agile hierarchy. It sounded good on slides, until he began questioning senior directors about things he barely understood. I watched department heads stumble through buzzwords just to survive his enthusiasm. Still, I stayed polite. I offered to brief him on treasury structures, explain how our liquidity systems were balanced across time zones. He nodded but never followed up. I saw that same arrogance you only see in people who've inherited power, not earned it, and soon that arrogance turned into decisions, brutal ones. Veteran managers started disappearing. He replaced them with friends from business school, people who knew branding, not balance sheets. HR sent out organizational refresh emails every Friday. It became a joke. If you survived the week, buy yourself a drink. Then came the client scare. One of our largest private equity clients, a European group managing over 150 million in funds, raised a concern. Delays in their transfer confirmations. It wasn't serious, just a small glitch from a recent software update. But Adam saw it as an opportunity to perform. He wanted a show, a scapegoat, someone he could remove publicly, to demonstrate accountability to the CEO and board. And in his mind, I was the perfect candidate. Respected, visible, technical, but not politically aligned with him. I should have seen it coming. The subtle questions about my legacy systems, the staged boardroom conversations about transitioning leadership, the way HR suddenly began auditing roles for redundancy. Then, a week before the Zoom call, I noticed something odd. My access logs being reviewed by IT without request. My finance clearance reports, usually reviewed quarterly, were being circulated to Adam's office. Still, I didn't panic. I trusted my record. I'd never made a misstep, but I underestimated one thing: perception. And Adam knew how to manipulate perception better than truth. He called that meeting under the guise of discussing digital treasury migration. But the moment the call began, I saw HR in the gallery view, silent, cameras off. That's when I knew. I didn't fight it. I let him read his rehearsed lines about streamlining operations, reducing overlap, and realigning functions for efficiency. What he didn't realize was that in firing me without treasury clearance, he wasn't just ending my job. He was triggering a financial lockdown that would soon choke his own empire. And as I logged out that day, the system I designed began counting down to automatic freeze, one that could only be lifted with my biometric authorization. My calmness wasn't defeat. It was the silence before impact. The first 48 hours after my firing were quiet. Too quiet. I knew the system's passive lock sequence wouldn't trigger instantly. It needed 2 business cycles of inactivity from authorized treasury accounts before it froze. I waited, sipping black coffee in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of files I hadn't yet brought home. Then the emails started. Not to me, of course. To my personal inbox by accident. Threads I'd been CC'd on before my termination. The subject lines were like quiet alarms. Urgent. Escrow freeze confirmation. Client unable to access fund portal. By the third one, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. It had begun. Vance Meridian's liquidity. Matrix wasn't a simple database. It was a multi-layered compliance grid built to detect unauthorized restructuring. The system treated the firing of a senior treasury director as a potential internal breach, unless reauthorized by my signature key and biometric ID. All movement of large-scale funds defaulted to frozen pending review. It wasn't sabotage. It was insurance, the rulebook that Adam clearly never read. By the next morning, the finance floor must have been chaos. I imagined the panic in their voices, the cold sweat of realizing that $150 million in client funds were unreachable. Treasury requests bouncing back with red error codes. Legal teams scrambling. I didn't take pleasure in their suffering, at least not yet. I'd spent years building that system to protect the company, but they'd made the one mistake you should never make in finance. They underestimated the architect. On day 3, I received a call. Unknown number, a hesitant voice. Ms. Clark? This is Stephanie from Treasury Support. Off record, ma'am, did you by any chance receive a deactivation confirmation before you left? Her voice trembled. I could hear background noise, muffled arguing, phones ringing nonstop. No, I said calmly. Why? A long pause. Then, because all accounts under your supervision are locked, and the CEO's office is asking questions. I thanked her and hung up, hiding a faint smile. The storm was here. By day 5, the media had caught wind of it. Rumors spread across financial news tickers. Vance Meridian liquidity delay. Private equity funds halted. Clients demanded answers. And Adam was nowhere to be seen publicly. Behind closed doors, I knew he was scrambling, trying to access systems he didn't understand. But every door he opened led to another lock that carried my digital signature. He'd fired me to prove control. Now he was watching that control dissolve. Every hour their silence grew heavier. Every headline, another nail in his credibility. I didn't need to lift a finger. My revenge had already begun its course. When panic rises in the boardroom, loyalty dies first. I'd seen it happen before during market crashes, but never this personally. Adam, desperate to hide his incompetence, began turning on his own people. By the end of that week, the company's leadership was fractured. Department heads were whispering behind closed doors. Legal teams camped in conference rooms. And no one wanted to take responsibility for the treasury freeze. But the truth was simple. The protocol was functioning exactly as I designed it. It was protecting client funds from internal risk, and Adam was that risk. Instead of admitting his mistake, he started crafting a narrative. He told the CEO that the freeze was caused by residual code from outdated systems. My systems. He called them legacy errors. In his version of events, I had left behind an unstable framework that triggered an unnecessary lockdown. He even claimed that I had resisted modernization and failed to integrate properly with new AI audit models. It was almost amusing how quickly he flipped the story. The same man who fired me to make himself look decisive now needed me to be the villain to save face. But he didn't stop there. He convinced HR to quietly leak an internal memo suggesting my non-cooperation with digital compliance. It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, people I had mentored for years stopped answering my messages. A few even posted cautious support for leadership during this challenging time. On LinkedIn, the betrayal stung. Not because I lost colleagues, but because I'd believed some of them were friends. Meanwhile, the CEO, Robert Vance, returned from his so-called sabbatical to deal with the disaster. The press had already branded the company's reputation as shaken. Few of our biggest investors were threatening to withdraw if the funds weren't unfrozen. Within days, I heard from an old ally, an auditor named Victor, who'd been discreetly following the chaos. He told me that Adam had authorized multiple system overrides in violation of compliance laws, trying to manually bypass my locks. Each attempt created a new alert, deepening the freeze. That meant one thing. Adam was tampering with protected financial data. And if the regulators discovered it, it wouldn't just be a PR issue. It would be a criminal one. The company's internal politics grew toxic. Adam blamed IT. IT blamed compliance. Compliance blamed legacy treasury design. And Robert, the CEO, was growing visibly impatient. His calm facade was cracking. Then came the message that changed everything. A private email, encrypted, from Robert himself. "Evelyn, this situation is escalating beyond control. Adam claims your systems caused this. I need to know the truth, quietly. If there's something I should be aware of, tell me now before the regulators do." For a moment I hesitated. I could have sent him the full documentation, cleared my name instantly. But I didn't, not yet. I wanted Adam to feel the walls close in first. The pressure, the fear, the humiliation he had so casually handed to me. So I wrote back, "Robert, I built a structure designed to protect client assets against unauthorized internal access. If your son authorized any operational changes without formal treasury clearance, the system is simply doing its job. Nothing more, nothing less." I hit send and leaned back, letting the meaning sink in. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. Within 24 hours, the board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't in that room, but Victor told me the details later. Adam had tried to justify his actions, but when the compliance officer presented the system logs, showing his repeated override attempts, the CEO's expression reportedly turned to stone. That was the moment betrayal found a new target. Robert realized the truth. His son had caused the freeze. His son had humiliated a senior executive. And worst of all, his son had put $150 million of client money at risk. By the next morning, the office was in full lockdown. Executives were questioned, access cards disabled. Adam's authority was temporarily suspended pending internal review. But even then, I wasn't finished. Because while the company was finally realizing the cost of their arrogance, I still held the key, literally, to their frozen fortune. And I intended to make them earn every dollar of it back. I waited until the board's panic made them predictable. Crisis exposes patterns. People repeat the same mistakes when they're terrified. And I had spent a decade watching those patterns unfold in spreadsheets and meeting minutes. This wasn't about theatrics anymore. It was about leverage, law, and leverage dressed as law. First, I secured allies. Victor, the auditor, became my quiet conduit. He fed me sanitized summaries of internal findings without triggering compliance alarms. Stephanie in Treasury. Support was now my eyes on the inside. She kept me posted on which doors they tried to pry open and which statements were being prepped for the media. I never asked anyone to break rules. I simply made it easy for them to tell me the truth. People want to do the right thing. They just need permission. Next, I built the architecture of my ask. I didn't want petty revenge. I wanted structural change that would ensure this kind of arrogance could never happen again. That meant a list of concrete demands I could present as reasonable corrective actions. Independent forensic audit at the company's expense. Public disclosure to affected clients. Immediate suspension of Adam from any operational role. and the reinstatement of a strengthened Treasury governance charter with me as an independent advisor during the transition. Those demands sounded less like vendetta and more like fiduciary duty. Then I created pressure. In finance, reputation moves markets faster than any legal letter. I quietly reached out to a trusted contact at the largest affected client, not to threaten, but to illuminate the truth. I provided them a concise, factual timeline showing that the freeze was a compliance trigger, not a theft. Their response was immediate. They wanted assurances and an independent audit. When clients call for audits, investors listen. When investors listen, boards move. Parallel to that, I gathered the evidence. Logs, timestamps, override attempts. Dry things that read like paperwork, but spoke loudly in the right rooms. I packaged a timeline that showed every step Adam took, every unauthorized manual override, and every failed bypass. I never leaked. Leaking would make me a villain. Instead, I delivered dossiers to the boards, legal counsel, and to Robert, with an offer that sounded professional. I will cooperate fully to unfreeze client funds, provided these governance conditions are accepted and implemented. It was an offer they could not ethically refuse. I also introduced a legal vector. My communications included subtle references to regulatory exposure. I didn't threaten regulators. Regulators do not need threats. They need facts. When compliance lawyers started running risk models, their faces told me what I already knew. The company would prefer remediation over an investigation that could go public. That preference became my leverage. Finally, I set the price of their redemption. I asked for a seat at the table to implement the Treasury Charter changes, a public correction to the narrative, and an assurance that Adam's operational power would be curtailed permanently. I demanded accountability, not humiliation for its own sake, but structural repair. I wanted the system fixed so that a name on a business card could not override controls again. When I sent the email laying out the plan, I felt no giddy triumph, only a cool clarity. Revenge that tastes like justice is the most righteous kind. I'd never wanted to break anyone. I wanted them to prove they could be better. They came back within 48 hours, not because I'd threatened them with melodrama, but because I'd given them a way out that preserved the company's credibility while forcing change. The board accepted a limited forensic audit, placed Adam on administrative leave, and asked me to help draft the revised Treasury governance. But I didn't walk back into their offices like a conquering general. I negotiated quietly, professionally. I demanded public transparency to the affected clients, restitution timelines, and a clause that would require multi-party biometric authorization for any fund movement exceeding a defined threshold. I wanted the rules rewritten, not to punish but to protect. When they agreed, I signed a conditional consultancy agreement. I would unfreeze the funds step by step, under controlled oversight, as each corrective action was implemented. It was surgical, irrevocable, and ironically humane. I had the keys, but I intended to use them to heal the damage they'd almost caused. This was not the end. It was the turning point. The board had learned that arrogance costs more than pride, and I had learned that power is safest when spread across more hands than one. The night before the unfreezing protocol was set to begin, I couldn't sleep. My laptop screen glowed in the dark, displaying the system dashboard. 237,000, locked in silent equilibrium, every transaction frozen mid-breath, every number a reminder of the moment they'd tried to erase me. Now they were waiting for me to set it free. The board had already called for an early morning session. It was to be both a debrief and, in their words, a symbolic reconciliation. They wanted a clean ending, a professional handshake to close a scandal. But I wasn't there to offer comfort. I was there to remind them who truly understood the architecture that held their empire together. When I entered the building, a dozen familiar faces turned toward me, some awkward, some ashamed, all silent. The same executives who had watched me get dismissed over Zoom were now on edge, unsure if I'd demand their resignation or forgiveness. The CEO, Robert Vance, stood at the end of the table. His composure was back, but his eyes were heavier. Adam wasn't there. Word was, he'd been sent to temporary leave abroad. Convenient wording for exile. Robert gestured for me to sit. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology," he said slowly. "And perhaps the company owes you much more than that." "I'm not here for apologies," I replied. "I'm here to ensure no one ever gets to use power this carelessly again." He nodded. "Then let's finish this." The unfreezing procedure began at exactly 9 hours a.m. connected my secure hardware key, scanned my fingerprint, and entered the encrypted passphrase I'd built into the system years ago. An algorithmic poem of numbers and memory. The room went silent as the dashboard on the wall shifted from locked to reinitializing protocol. Then line by line, the frozen accounts began to unlock. The air felt thick, as if everyone was afraid to breathe until the final confirmation appeared. When the system beeped authorization complete, the CFO, one of the few who had stayed quiet during my firing, let out a long breath of relief. Applause erupted, cautious and half-hearted. I simply closed my laptop and stood. But before leaving, I handed Robert a file, printed, sealed, and signed. "This is my final report," I said. "It includes every unauthorized access attempt made during the freeze. You'll find the timestamps match the days your son tried to bypass security." His hand froze mid-air as he accepted it. The silence in the room stretched. I saw realization harden across his face, not just as a CEO, but as a father who finally understood the cost of blind loyalty. "I'll take care of it," he murmured. "I know," I replied. "Just remember, control without discipline destroys everything it touches." I turned to leave, but the head of compliance stopped me at the door. "Evelyn," she said softly, "do you realize what you've done? You just saved this company from implosion." I smiled faintly. "No, I just made sure they learned who kept it alive all along." Outside, the crisp air felt different, lighter, almost electric. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting. My revenge wasn't the chaos I unleashed. It was the order I restored. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from Victor. "He's gone. Adam officially resigned this morning. Board statement calls it voluntary transition. They'll never admit what really happened, but everyone knows." I stared at the message, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. That was enough. In a world obsessed with power, the greatest revenge is not destruction, it's correction. To take what was broken and make it unbreakable. By the end of that week, financial media declared Vance Meridian stabilized. Clients praised the company's new transparency initiative. My name appeared in quiet press releases as independent treasury advisor. No drama, no headlines, just recognition. The kind that lasts longer than applause. And somewhere, far from those glossy offices, Adam Vance was left to wonder how a woman he fired on a whim had dismantled his career with nothing more than silence, patience, and a system that told the truth. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded into quiet correction. Vance Meridian slowly returned to business as usual. But it wasn't the same company anymore. The hierarchy had softened, the arrogance dimmed. Meetings began with questions instead of orders, and the word compliance was no longer treated as a burden, but a boundary. My office was different too. Smaller, quieter, away from the noise of the trading floors. I didn't need corner windows or company cars. I had something better, control on my own terms. The board called me a consultant, but everyone knew what that really meant. I was the invisible circuit breaker, the final gate between greed and disaster. Every week I walked the halls that once echoed with gossip about my firing. People who couldn't look me in, the eye now greeted me with respect, or at least with caution. It didn't matter which. Fear can be a powerful teacher. Robert kept his word. Adam's resignation was framed as career realignment, but internally, the files were sealed. No one spoke of the Zoom call, the freeze, or the scandal. It became corporate folklore, a whispered reminder that the company's systems remember everything, even when people pretend not to. Sometimes late at night, I'd log into the Treasury dashboard just to watch the balance sheets breathe again, every number perfectly aligned, every transaction transparent. The order soothed me. Numbers don't lie. They never have agendas. It's people who twist them. One evening, Robert called. His voice carried the fatigue of a man who had learned too much too late. "Evelyn," he said, "I read your final report again. You could have ruined us." "I didn't need to," I replied quietly. "You were already doing that yourselves." He didn't argue, only said thank you for not letting us collapse. After the call, I looked out my office window. The city lights shimmered like data points in the dark, fragile, interconnected, alive. For the first time, I didn't feel anger anymore, just balance. Justice had been served not by rage, but by precision. I'd been fired to make a spectacle, but I returned as a shadow, silent, necessary, and untouchable. When the dust finally settled, I stood by the window of my office, watching the city lights flicker like distant memories. The war was over, not of weapons, but of wills. They had underestimated silence, not realizing it could be the loudest form of revenge. The company survived, but it was different now. Cleaner, calmer. I didn't need applause or recognition. Their downfall was enough. I had turned their greed into their undoing. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in courtrooms or through confrontation. It comes quietly, in the precision of timing, in the patience to wait while truth ripens. I learned that revenge doesn't always have to destroy. Sometimes it restores balance, dignity, and self-worth. Now every time I look at the skyline, I don't see the place where I was betrayed, I see the place where I reclaimed myself. This is Revenge Untold, where silence strikes harder than words, and every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.